So now we're going to look at a disaster clause. So you've filled out the beneficiaries. There might be 3 children, could be your grandchildren, could be friends, charities. But what happens, let's say you've got children and they die. So I'm going to just refresh your memory as to the bloodline gifting clause. So all wills, well, all Australian wills will normally have a bloodline gifting clause, which means that if your beneficiary dies, now I'll make them children, it may not be children in your circumstances, but we'll just call them children. If your children die, so here we've got Luke and Brett. Luke dies before you. So one of your children dies before you. He was going to get 50%. But now, because he has children, his 50% goes down the bloodline. It goes down the bloodline, and his 50% now is shared between his children. If he's got 2 children, then they get 25% each of your estate. Called a bloodline gifting clause, and it's common in most wills, and Legal Consolidated follows that and puts that into your will. It's automatic. What happens if Luke has no children? Then he has no bloodline left, no children, no grandchildren, no great-grandchildren. His bloodline's gone. It goes back to the pot for your remaining son, Brett, and Brett will now get 100% of your estate. So there's the bloodline gifting clause, and it's there to help you so you don't have to update your will in a situation one of your children dies. God forbid. You can override that, of course, but that's we can talk about that another time. Now, let's have a look at a terrible scenario. You have got a number of children and grandchildren. So you've got, many children and grandchildren, and you pay for them to fly to Tahiti for a holiday, but out of Sydney Airport, the aeroplane crashes and there's no survivors. You are dead, all your children are dead, and all your grandchildren are dead or never born, and all great-grandchildren were never born or dead. So your bloodline is now finished, which means all those gifts, the residuary beneficiary gifts that we put in this clause, so you might have had 3 children there, they're all dead. That's when you need a disaster clause. So let's have a look how this disaster clause works. And just note that, for example, the king wouldn't fly with his heir because the aeroplane could go down together for that reason. He doesn't want to lose both the king and the next in line to the crown. So when does disaster clause kick in? You're dead, your children are all dead, and your grandchildren are all dead. Well, what happens then? Well, you'll press yes, and you might put in your parents, for example. So here I'm going to put my mum in as to 50%, 50, and I'm going to add another, and I'm going to add my dad. Give him 50%. All right, so we have there's mum. And dad. So I die, my children are all dead, my grandchildren are all dead, and my great-grandchildren never born. The will has played itself out from the beneficiary clause. I put a disaster clause in, leaving 50% to my mum and 50% to my dad. Well, what if they die? What if they now die? Well, we're getting the realms of fantasy here, and it's unlikely because my children don't live with me anymore. I wouldn't put a disaster clause in my will. I don't need it. The chances of it happening are pretty remote. But in this scenario, if my children are all dead, my grandchildren are all dead, my mum and dad are dead, then what my mum and dad would have got will go to my siblings. So what mum and dad would have got, because they're dead, will go to their children under the bloodline gifting clause, which means my siblings will now pick up the wealth. If you don't want that, of course, you can put in a charity. So there's you could put a charity in. So let's put in the Royal Flying Doctor as a charity. So I'm not going to leave it to mum and dad, because in my case, my mum and dad are dead. So I'm going to leave it to Flying Doctor and Australian business number, ABN, 11 numbers, and put in their address. They're in Sydney somewhere. And going to give them 100%. So instead of leaving everything to my mum and dad, in case something happens, I'm going to leave it to a charity. So again, most of you will not put in a disaster clause because most of you have adult children. In this scenario, the will maker has 3 children and 14 grandchildren. So it just gives you an extreme example of where a disaster clause would be a waste of time. All 3 of the children have to die, and all 14 of the grandchildren would have to die before you. So in that instance, you wouldn't put a disaster clause in. So beneficiaries, there they all are, but they get wiped out and their bloodline gets wiped out, then you'd insert a disaster clause. It's for a mum or dad with young children. If children are all grown up, you wouldn't concern yourself with a disaster clause. The next question we're going to deal with is contemplation of marriage and divorce.